Today's scripture is coming from Romans, the 12th chapter, verses 1 and 2. I will be reading from the International Version, and it reads as follows. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So readeth the word of the Lord. This is Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 from the New International Version. May it add a blessing and adherence of the word.
Thank you so much. Today, I want to speak from the topic, a growth mindset. You know, I work in IT on my 9-to-5 job, and this week I was reading an article about digital transformation. And that's the process of using digital technologies to create new or to modify existing business processes or culture or even customer experience in order to meet changing business and market requirements. As I read the article, I couldn't help but think that businesses are not the only places that are transforming, but transformation is taking place or is needed in our communities, our country, and all of that, it's needed in our individual lives. If we want to have a peaceful and hopefully progressive world, we need to be open to transformation. In the article I was reading, there were two questions that stayed on my mind. The first question was, do you want to prove yourself or improve yourself? Do you want to prove yourself or improve yourself? The second question is, do you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? Are we committed to things staying the way they are, staying stagnant in life? Or are we open to positive life-enhancing change? There are some people who are just reluctant to change. If anything, there are some people that want to take us backward. Think about the voting rights that are issues that's going on in Georgia and the 42 other states that are considering making voting more difficult for people, particularly Democratic people of color. There are those in leadership who want to use their power for the good of the few, but not for the many. Where we can have a country where everyone's life and everyone's vote is valued, many officials want to maintain a country as white and as conservative as possible. And when they saw how people could exercise their vote in a way to make room for more in our last election, now they're using their power to make laws to try to shut that down. But transformation is still happening, although the minds of some people are fighting to keep things the same or worse. Our text today speaks about transformation, which is really the result of a growth mindset. Our text comes out of the book of Romans, or as we say, Paul's letter to the church at Rome. This is believed to be one of the few books that were actually written by Paul. As I've said in the past, some of the books that are attributed to Paul were not actually written by Paul, but were written by people in the name of Paul later on. Life for Christians that Paul was writing to in this text was a little tenuous at that time. And that didn't come from external persecution, but it came from problems that were going on within the Christian community. The backstory is that in about the year 40 CE, Emperor Claudius issued an expulsion edict for the Christian Jews that was probably due to riots that had started because of early Christian preaching. But then at about the year 54 CE, Emperor Nero rescinded the decree, and that enabled the expelled Jews to return. Now imagine what kind of community that would have created. There would have been quite a rift in that community, because there were some Jews that were purely held on to the Torah, They had no concern for Christ. And there were others who, as we would say, were completely sold out to Jesus. They were completely Jesus focused. And there were those who had developed or acquired new customs in those 14 years of expulsion from Rome. But then here they are trying to live together again as one community of faith. That sounds like the perfect storm for conflict. And it was this conflict that occasioned this topic in the letter that came from Paul. Paul believed that there are some things in which a mix of new Christians have to agree upon, but there are some things that you don't have to agree upon. But he insisted that they stay together when it came to worship. That's why he said, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. In Paul's view, worship was a fitting response to a God who had been so merciful to them. Paul's main theme in the whole book of Romans was God's righteousness. In other words, God's loyalty to the promises that God had made to the patriarchs. Righteousness, in Paul's view, meant setting to right that which is out of joint, restoring things to the way they should be. Paul encourages the people to present their whole bodies, which means to present their whole selves, mind, body, and spirit to God. So worship for Paul was no joke. It was no Sunday morning at 11 or 10 o'clock thing. Worship was where you came to present yourself in order to be restored to be in the image of God. In the New Revised Standard Version of the text of the Bible, it says, which is your spiritual worship. But in this regard, the King James is more accurate because it says reasonable worship, which means when you come to worship, you bring your whole thinking self. You don't just come to say I was there. You don't just come to go along with whatever is said. You bring your whole thinking self. And this always puzzled me. Why do we say don't question the Bible now, or don't question God? Why were we given these brains to begin with if we weren't supposed to use it? I remember reading somewhere a long time ago where Martin Luther King Jr. said, sometimes when we go to church, it's like someone had a new beatitude that says, blessed are the ignorant. No, we have minds, we have brains that we're supposed to use. And that was Paul trying to say, to bring your whole self. We have minds that are supposed to be restored into being like the mind of God. That's why he says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. J.B. Phillips translated the text this way. He said, don't let the world squeeze you into its own mold. Paul was encouraging the Christians of his day to transform their minds by renewing it into the image of God, so that they may discern God's will, what is good and what is acceptable and what is perfect. In his case, he was saying, focus on God and stop the bickering. Look deeply into the issues from all of your various points of view, and then decide out of that pot what is good, what is acceptable, and what is perfect. Focus on the things you agree to in common in this new Christian community, and let all the other things go. In other words, don't sweat the small stuff. Paul was saying, renew your mind so that what perceives from your transformed mind does indeed reflect the image and the will of God. Even now in 2021, some of us need to be reminded to renew our minds so that we'll be able to know the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. All of us can search our heart and our mind and find some area in which we can do better, where we can ask ourselves, do I want to prove myself or do I want to improve myself? Do I want a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? Some of us miss opportunities to grow because we have a fixed mindset. We know what we know, and that's it. That's all we want to do is prove that we're right where we are. Clearly, we can't know everything because we all have different worldviews, different histories, different points of view. But often people and things don't improve because of fear. Fear makes us resistant to change. Fear of others keeps us in a fixed mindset that can't really see the other. That's some of what's causing this lockdown in voting rights. People are afraid of, as the demographics of our country is shifting, it's changing, that they must create ways to ensure that whiteness and conservatism maintains control. They have a fixed mindset that does not see the richness available in a more inclusive environment where everyone is seen as being created in the image of God. But that requires renewing of minds that need to be transformed into growth mindsets that include and see the goodness in everyone. Minds that know God is our source, and they don't have to be afraid that there's not enough resources, not enough power, not enough access to go around. I read something that said we're all trapped in traps that we have made. Well, if we made the trap, then probably we have a key that we can use to get ourselves out of it. But the thing is, we have to want to get out of it. We have to want to change. But some of us just don't want to do the work of change. John Mark Green said, change can be hard. It requires no extra effort to settle for the same old thing. Autopilot keeps us locked into past patterns. But transforming your life, that requires courage, commitment, and effort. It's tempting to stay camped in the zone of that's just how it is. But to get to the really good stuff in life, you have to be willing to become an explorer, an adventurer. A fixed mindset keeps us stuck, or sometimes it contracts, but a growth mindset expands. A growth mindset challenges us. I read that a growth mindset is associated with better performance and greater creativity, greater psychological agility, and resilience. Think about it. When we run into trouble, what would be better? A fixed mindset that is confined to what we know, where we don't consider other possibilities, where we just give up based on what we know, or a growth mindset where we start looking for answers and start to consider positive possibilities. You know, back when I was diagnosed with MS, I could have given up. Even before that, when I didn't know what it was, but just knew something was going wrong with my body. For 40 years, I had been pushing, doing whatever I could do, going to the gym, working out, going to the doctor, trying to find what was wrong, doing whatever I could do to be the best I could be in whatever the situation was. Successfully managing a chronic illness or any difficult condition requires a growth mindset, requires the ability to look beyond what is and see what can be. Let me share a trick that I recently learned about facing challenges. This week, I've been kind of sad and troubled, been crying a lot actually, because I've had a dog, Pepper, for 2 months, but I have to surrender Pepper back to the Humane Society because even though she's smart and cute and she's a little sweetheart most of the time, she has this streak in her where she attacks our other dog, and she's done it 4 times, and the last time was rather severe. Even a professional trainer said the relationship between the 2 dogs would probably never be safe. But I cried every time I thought about giving her up. She is such a sweet dog. But then this week I was reading something and it suggested that there was this new way to face a challenge. There was a way that we could do a different exercise that would help us to see things differently. It was to get a sheet of paper and write down something that was good about this challenge you're facing. Write down everything you could think of that was good about this challenge. So I got a sheet of paper and I wrote about my dog and having to give my dog back. I wrote, she'll be free to walk around the house when she gets a new home. She won't have to wear a muzzle around the house. She'll have someone who loves her, who has a house where she is the only dog. Oreo, our existing dog, will be safe. And the fear and the tension that's been in our household will be gone for everybody involved, especially for the two dogs. There were other things I put on that list, but that list helped me to stop crying. I cry a little bit, but it's helped me to stop crying so much. And I was able to start exuding positive energy, not fear and sadness. That wasn't good for me, the dog, or anybody else in this house. But then to show you how God works things out, that same afternoon that I wrote that note with all of those positive things, I got an email from the Humane Society saying they would be able to take her back and rehome my little dog. The first step in making any significant change is that we have to want to, because we are the only ones who can change our minds. That exercise of identifying the positive helped me to transform my mind. You might not have a dog issue, but try that exercise the next time you're facing any kind of challenge. Bernie Siegel said, embrace each challenge in your life as an opportunity for self-transformation. We've been given the gift of a mind that can grow, giving us an opportunity to reimagine. We have the power to change our minds. You know, our country has seen a lot of violence, but we do need to know these things. We do need to be aware, but we must transform our minds, that instead of violence, in our minds, we think of peace. And we believe that peace is possible, because we'll never see the way to get to peace if we don't believe it to be possible. As I mentioned earlier, there's an assault on voting rights. But instead of giving up or feeling defeated, we can shift our minds to start a campaign to make sure everybody is properly prepared to vote. We can help them get to the polls when the polls are open. Instead of having COVID fatigue, we can transform our minds to consider the blessings that we've gained over this past year, like the connection that we've made that we would not have had otherwise if we weren't forced to use the phone or Zoom or some other way to reach out to our family and friends. And we can use our influence, change our thinking to help other people change their thinking so they'll get a vaccine, that everybody under our influence gets vaccinated. Like the people Paul was writing to, we can transform our minds to align with the mind of God, to align with love, no matter what society suggests. You know, today is Palm Sunday. This is the Sunday when, in a Christian context, we remember Jesus's entry into Jerusalem at the beginning of the final week of his life. On that day, people were celebrating and welcoming Jesus into the city like a rock star. But a few days later, they had been swayed to think in a different way. They started to think like the fearful and destructive desires of the religious leaders and the suspicious political officials. Clearly, the crowd was swayed by groupthink. They let the world squeeze them into its mold. They were not able to discern what was good and what was acceptable and what was perfect. But in spite of that, look what happened. After Jesus was executed, people's minds have been being transformed for over almost 2,000 years. And we're still attempting, and people are learning how to live a love ethic as he lived and as Jesus taught. Every day is a day to improve ourselves, which makes room, versus proving ourselves, which locks out. I'm glad we have the opportunity to renew our minds every day. Our worship, our gratitude for God's gift of life to us is to transform, to reflect that same image of love, justice, and inclusion. I invite all of us to look inside and examine our life, examine our beliefs, examine our ways of being in the world. And if you don't like what you see, you have the power to change it. You can change your mind to allow life to live and love to grow. We can't change everybody else's thinking, but we can manage our own. Perhaps with a growth mindset, the things we do, the decisions we make will be positively impacted to somebody else, not just to ourselves. Maybe somebody seeing us acting in a certain way and thinking in a certain way would help them invite them to change, or at least to examine their thoughts, because then it multiplies. I like how Marianne Williamson put it. She said, personal transformation can and does have global effects. As we go, so goes the world, for the world is us. The revolution that will save the world is ultimately a personal one. Do you want to prove yourself, or do you want to improve yourself? Do you want to improve your community, your family, your world? Well, let's open our minds to positive possibility. Let's live with an open mindset. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.